Welcome back to the show, everybody. This is the Upper Tier podcast. Thanks for joining me. We're doing a little show here tonight where we said we talk about Saudi Arabia and this sports investment, really, and the effect it's going to have on football and all that kind of thing. We thought we'd delve in, take a good look at it, give our thoughts on it. Let me know your thoughts, of course, in the comments. But as always, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification, and of course, drop a like on the video. If you have any thoughts on this, feel free to drop them into the comments as I go along. It's quite a broad subject because it encompasses a lot more. You've got the sports side of it, you've got the investment side of it, and a lot of other different things to go with it as well. It's a tough subject, it's a difficult subject, and it's so many different outcomes and stuff like that, and so many different connecting moving parts. You've got the sports side of it, you've got the political side of it, geography, everything, and it masses a lot of stuff in there, and we've tried to break it down as best we can. But it is a tough subject. I have a lot of notes here and stuff. I'm going to breeze over them as best I can. Won't bore you with a lot of the general detail and stuff like that. But there's a couple of significant points that came out of it that I looked at over the weekend when I was looking at it. Excuse me if you hear my voice here at the moment. I'm all clogged up and feel like I've a bit of a sore throat coming on. So with that, we'll go in the comments. Red Bird, how are you, my friend? Red Bird D9, how are you? And also Daz is in. Big up Niall, what's the crack? All good, Daz. Not too bad at all. But yeah, we said we'd jump on and do this show tonight. Just to let you know, a bit of housekeeping before we get into it as well. I'm going to be on Doug's, the Dugout football show. I'm going to be on that tomorrow night. We're going to be doing a preview for the Liverpool game, the pre-season game that's happening on Wednesday. So that's on Doug's show. Looking forward to that. I haven't been on Doug's channel before, so he hit me up. So really looking forward to that. Also, I'll be dropping my weekly review of Dark Side of the Ring. We'll be looking at the adorable Adrian Adonis. Kind of a similar flavour to that season. Thursday, I'm going to be doing a show with Darren where we're going to be reviewing and taking a look at all the new kits for the new season in the Premier League. And we'll take a look at some of that stuff there and have some fun and have some tears based on some of the designs that are out there. And then Friday, I'm doing a show with Warren. Not sure whether it's a live show or a recorded show, but basically I'm going on Warren's show, Warren's Team Talk. He's interviewing football fans at the moment and just talking about their journey in football and growing up, and it's kind of like let's say it's like if you look at the shows, they're really, really good. It's like This Is Your Life with Eamon Andrews. But for football fans, talking about their journey in football and stuff like that. So pretty cool. So really looking forward to this week's podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. But again, as I said, this one is a tough one. So what we'll do tonight is we'll go through a bit of the background. We'll talk about state investment and what are we going to cover as well. We're going to cover the opportunities for footballers, how we feel about them and what way they're going to play out. Ignoring this situation in Saudi at our peril. We're going to talk about what's emerging, so the net effect of what's happening in these things as well. And then we're also going to talk about the internal benefits. So why is Saudi pushing this? Why have they suddenly jumped into this kind of realm and stuff like that? So we're going to be talking about all those things. Really, really interesting when you get into it, because even though I'm a football fan and stuff like that, I'm intrinsically, because I'm self-employed, and I run my own business, I'm really interested in the way the business of football takes place, and all the background stuff I find very interesting and intriguing. But we start with a little bit of a background then. Ian's in as well. How are you, Ian? What's the crack, man? Good to see you there, pal. Thanks for joining us as well. This one has kind of come up. It's an interesting one, really. I mean, obviously, they've been making moves and trying to get involved in a lot of stuff at the moment. Saudi Arabia, as they're trying to push to move into the West and expand the culture and all that kind of stuff, and take on board a little bit of Western culture as well. And we know there's a lot of kind of moral debates in the background and all that kind of stuff. We kind of seen it with Qatar. Everyone was going into the World Cup in Qatar thinking, the whole thing, how it was kind of rigged and bought and all this kind of thing, and the migrant workers and all the other humanitarian stuff and everything that was going on and all. And it was kind of quite a negative feeling going into that Qatar World Cup. But I think a lot of football fans came out of the back of that World Cup thinking it was a really, really good World Cup. It looked like it was ran really, really well. And and it was quite an enjoyable World Cup. So when you digested all that other stuff on the way in, and you kind of parked that, and then the tournament kicked off, and you started focusing on the football, a lot of those things sort of evaporate into the background kind of thing, and then the sport and the football and the fans kind of take precedent. And not that one is higher up, if you like, than the other. I mean, they're both heavily linked. But yeah, that's how we kind of felt. So that's kind of a bit of background there. But like, it's the powerhouse of football in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and we know that they've made moves. They've tried to buy WWE off Vince McMahon. We've seen what's happened with the Live Golf situation. If you think about the PGA and how many years the PGA is established, my guess is well over 100 years at this stage. Golfing is quite enshrined in its legacy. And literally, Live Golf went out there, signed up a load of golfers, paid them huge amounts of money to jump ship. They jumped ship, and then within, I don't know, it's probably within a year, I'd say. Within a year, if you look at the documentary that's on Netflix or Amazon or whatever it is, within a year, all of a sudden, Live Golf has gone to the forefront of these things, and they've created what they call this partnership with the PGA and stuff like that. So, but it looks like what it does is it wraps its arms around it, suffocate it, and then take it over, kind of thing, you know. So it was kind of we seen a few months ago there when that was announced and stuff like that. The golfers were going crazy, and there was talk they wanted compensation and all because they hadn't made the jump. If you think of Rory McIlroy, he was at the front of this, and he was saying that, like, you know, he could have went, you know, and he could have went for massive money. And now that they've taken it over, that massive money ain't necessarily there. So is there going to be compensation for the players that didn't jump and all this kind of thing? So it just got a little bit messy. And it was the documentary that's on about it with Ian Poulter and stuff like that and all, it shows you that golf being a gentleman's game, when money gets involved, can be quite cunty. And that's the way it went. So interesting that there. So the golf situation, we know that they've had meetings with the governing bodies in tennis as well. They're looking at moving into the realm of tennis. So they're moving into a lot of different pieces of sport. We know in football, in terms of countries in the region and stuff like that, now taking ownership, either full ownership or majority shares in clubs. We've seen PSG, we've seen Newcastle, to name but a few. And of course, Man United could be on the cusp of this with a new Qatari owner potentially happening. We don't know whether that's going to go through or not. But then we've seen all the way that has operated. We see also the links with Chelsea as well, where, you know, Clear Lake has gone in there and they've taken over Chelsea with the Bowley Group and all this kind of thing. And what's happened is, actually, we know now that a lot of the funding that's gone in there has come from Saudi Arabia. And now we've seen that the real conundrum that Chelsea was in, if you go back 8 weeks ago, we all thought Chelsea was in serious trouble. They'd have to unload players, and financial fair play was going to knock them out of the park and all this sort of thing. And all of a sudden, they just open up the gates and they start unloading players into this Saudi region, this PIF. The background to that is they've basically taken control. And we'll talk about it with the state-backed investment, but the PIF has taken control of the top 4 teams over there in the league en route to privatisation of the league. And with that in mind, then, because they have huge investment in Chelsea, they can't afford for that investment in Chelsea to kind of go sideways and go wrong. So they find this solution where they can just move players around. And what it does is it basically allows them to circumvent the rules of the game, or the rules of financial fair play, or whatever way you want to look at it. You know, they can also buy in players for a lot of money, and they could loan them out potentially to partnership clubs and stuff like that. So right unfolding here in front of us really is the face of football is changing dramatically. And it's changing so quickly as well, and in ways that we didn't realise, you know, and that we don't see until it kind of happens. You've seen it with Bowley there back at Christmas time, I think it was, or you know, bringing in players and giving them 8-year contracts and stuff like that. And everyone was going, oh, God, how are they going to do this kind of thing and all, you know? And they just find a way, you know, to negate these rules and find a way around, especially financial rules. When you're dealing with billionaires and trillionaires, they're well educated in the world of finance and how money moves around and all that kind of stuff, and how they can circumvent these things, you know? But Saudi Arabia is already the dominant league in the region in terms of popularity and stuff like that. And what they're looking at basically in the background is they're going to bring in these stars and mix it in with a number of other players that they're bringing in. But what they're also going to do is, well, they're going to bring in local players and stuff like that and develop them through the system as well, with a view of potentially then having players from the region that they can export out into Europe. Now, we've seen a lot of this. If you look at the development of the African nations and the AFCON and all and stuff like that, they've done a similar type thing where they've developed football to a certain level and then they've moved players into Europe through the French league and stuff like that, because obviously the wealth isn't sitting there potentially to be able to do like what Saudi Arabia can do. So they've had to move players in. So it's been more outgoing than incoming. But with Saudi Arabia, they have the wealth and the backing to do it both ways, basically. So it's really, really interesting. But what they can do as well is they can kind of carve up the region. And what they can do is they can harness a lot of that. So very similar if you talk about from a geography point of view, if you think about it, I'm living here in Ireland. I follow Liverpool Football Club. So there's probably thousands of Irish people traveling over to the UK every week to go to matches and stuff like that. So you'll get a similar thing happening in that region, where you'll get people from Qatar and the UAE and all these different places, and they will travel to Saudi Arabia because they want to see Ronaldo, because they want to see Kante, because they want to see Benzema, because they want to see Ruben Neves or whoever else it is, so forth, Fabinho, whoever else goes there. And that will continue to roll and roll and roll. So what that does is it allows them to generate then this revenue and this wealth that brings them then onto sort of the top 20 money list on Deloitte and stuff like that. So you're getting that recognition out there and you're developing the region all the time. So we've seen it really with Ronaldo. Ronaldo was kind of the kicker for this. And what Ronaldo did was he went in there and everyone looks at the money and they think about the deal and they go, oh my God, this is crazy, £2 million a week or whatever it is and stuff like that. But if you take Ronaldo as a base, when Ronaldo went in there, as we know, Ronaldo, he's the highest followed person, I think, on Instagram, 600 million followers or something like that. Absolutely something crazy. Pretty close to the upper tier. No, only messing. But you can see the impact that he had already. And a lot of people think that a lot of this stuff has to change and it takes time and stuff like that. It doesn't necessarily take time, because you have to remember as well, if you look at the Live Golf model, that took what, 18 months? And before you know it, they had circulated and surrounded the PGA, if you like, into a situation. So that was the situation there. So it doesn't always necessarily take time, and we'll clarify that as we go through it, that sometimes when you have this wealth and you're pouring that wealth in there and you're dragging in what you want to drag in, you can change and emerge and evolve really, really quickly. But if you look, going back to the Ronaldo situation, when he joined Al Nassr, they had Instagram followers of 1 million at the time, and it jumped to almost 15 million when he joined. So literally 15 times what it was, it jumped once Ronaldo came in, which is huge, massive. And also the broadcasting rights to the league were also reportedly sold to 36 overseas territories. So 36 overseas territories straight away wanted to be broadcast in the Saudi Pro League because Ronaldo had gone in there. And that's just one. That's just one player, remember. So this is going to happen across a number of teams, and they're spreading it in a very clever way as well. So what happens is you're not just going to watch, Al Ittihad or Al Nassr or whatever it is. They're going to spread it around the team. So you'll generally have a general football interest in a number of these teams, and that's how they build up the league. Similar to what they did in the Premier League in the outset, when they started bringing in players and the way they constructed it and stuff like that. Not only did you follow your own team, like I followed Liverpool, I would have had an interest in what Arsenal was doing, what Chelsea was doing. You would still have an interest in your rivals, and you would still have an interest in most of the teams in the league. Let's take a few comments. Ian is in. Saudi Arabia seems to be the talk nowadays. Yeah, absolutely. Morris is in. Is Shelby going to move to Saudi? Prince John? Can you imagine? Just imagine that. So let's talk a little bit then. It's a bit of couldn't be bothered watching Saudi. There's already enough on TV. Yeah, absolutely. But let's go for state back investment then. If you look at the Saudi league, it's 4 biggest clubs: Al Ittihad, Al Ahly of Jeddah, Riyadh, Al Hilal, and Al Nassr were recently taken over by the Saudi Arabia's private investment fund, the PIF, making the first steps towards looking at privatization. The development is potentially more significant than the arrival of famous foreign players and coaches, although both go hand in hand. So obviously they've recognized a situation where, they can pump a load of money in, front load it, bring in these players, bring in these coaches, develop this league, make it really, really attractive. But also the fact that it's privatized now is very, very significant in that conversation. Um, the revenue generation, obviously, from broadcasting can be absolutely massive. And obviously sponsorship and other commercial deals and all that kind of stuff. And we've seen that even with these teams. Like if you look at Man City and you look at PSG, and you look at what Newcastle are probably going to do as well. This is huge because they would never reach those kind of heights unless that ownership was in place and those commercial deals and everything were in place. Now, there's the conversation about whether revenues are inflated and how money is moved around and sports washing and all those other conversations have to be had as well. But that's really the drive, and the drive is really merchandising and possibly from inward investment as well. So they're trying to get to a stage where they develop the teams and develop the broadcasting and the league to a point where, that money could be coming in from other regions. So you could be looking at potentially, American sponsors or UK sponsors or European sponsors who want to come in and sponsor the Saudi League as well to make it more attractive for that inward investment as well. Danny is in. How are we? Saudians League will never be a strong league. It's all for publicity because they have money to burn. I don't know. I'm not too sure whether that's the case. I think there's a greater drive here, and we'll get into it. I don't think it'll reach the heights, if you like, of the Premier League and stuff like that. But I think, if they keep on bringing in this talent and they keep on drawing, if you think about the project that happened in China, but it kind of fell short because it never really got up and running, it never really got going. And we've seen players like Oscar and all moving there and the deals they went for and stuff like that. And then China just ran into trouble. I think the Saudi situation is a little bit different in terms of the wealth. I think in terms of how they view business, in terms of their drive, because they all want to win. They're all very competitive and all that kind of stuff. So I think it'd be a different situation. Good, thank you. Excellent. But let me know your thoughts. Absolutely. Keep on pumping them into the comments there and stuff like that as I go through it. The target that they want for these 4 clubs, the target is that they want these 4 clubs to be in the top 20 clubs in the world in terms of revenue turnover on the Deloitte list. So that's a huge target if you think about that. And that's for 4 clubs. So absolutely massive. That's what they're targeting. This is the bit where it says, and this touches on Danny's point as well, this can be a little bit far-fetched when you look at it and you're on the top level of thinking about it. But when you actually scratch the surface and you think about what they're trying to do, they're trying to develop this core league. They're trying to present it to the world as a package. They're trying to attract in foreign investment. They're trying to attract in some really, really good players. And this is not necessarily, it's not necessarily a retirement home for older players either. You've seen people like Ruben Neves has made the move, who I would regard as a guy who's in the prime of his midfield career and stuff like that. But he has seen it as an opportunity to come in there. And I'm sure there's others. So by those players going in there, and potentially coaches and stuff like that as well, that's obviously going to raise the quality of the league to the point where one day we probably will look at it as an option to view it and stuff. That I know Morris touched on it earlier, but if there's really, really good quality football in there, and pending from a geographical point of view, how these things move, we're going to talk about, is this the beginning of the Super League? Is this where the birth of the Super League is going to be? Do we see a situation where potentially we're looking at the expansion of the Champions League and maybe the rebranding of it? Are we eventually going to move into these regions? Are we eventually going to end up with a Champions League that's not European based, if you like, which ultimately becomes the Super League, and how that's going to go? And so we look at all that in a minute and stuff like that. But certainly people thinking that this is going to take kind of a long time. It's not going to take as long as people think. And when you have investment and when you have money in there and when it becomes attractive, change can happen really, really quick, really, really rapidly. We've seen it. So it's really, really important. But it has obviously implications. there's implications for the region, there's implications for the knock-on effect to the African countries and all this kind of stuff. So huge implications on this, really, really big. There's going to be a Club World Cup in 2025 in the USA. Yeah, there could be, Sean. There could be, and it's going to be really, really interesting. And we can see already, if you think about it, every couple of years, the European situation, it's changing all the time. We have changes coming down the road to the Champions League at the moment, how it's expanding. It's becoming a bigger competition. And then the net effect of what that has on your domestic tournaments and stuff. How do you fit all these matches in? Are teams going to have to carry bigger squads? Are we going to get to a stage where it's football 12 months of the year, that there's no off season, but that you rest players at key times and all that kind of stuff? How does the international football scene fit into that calendar in terms of friendlies and the amount of kind of the emergence of the Nations League and all that kind of stuff? So there's a lot of work to be done there, and of course there's different governing bodies, all with different hands in the pie of this football calendar that we call it. So it's interesting from that point of view. And this is the issue that I spoke on there. One of the big concerns in the region is that Saudi Arabia comes in and just dominates it. Like similar to what the Premier League did. The Premier League came in and it's kind of, in terms of broadcasting, in terms of fans, in terms of merchandise, in terms of everything, has absolutely dominated European football, if you like. Not always won the Champions League and all that kind of stuff, not in terms of trophy haul and stuff like that, but in terms of actual revenue and financial wealth and all that kind of stuff. If you think about it, I mean, I grew up in the time, if you go back to the early 90s and stuff like that, and you think about how big the Dutch League was at the time. We used to always talk about the Dutch League and the Dutch players and all that kind of stuff, and the Dutch players who were playing around Europe and stuff like that. And now you look at how much that Dutch League to a point has fallen away and not as dominant as it was. The great teams, the great Ajax teams and PSV and all these different teams. It's totally different now. So now you have a very dominant Premier League there. You obviously have La Liga there, the Bundesliga and the French League and Portugal and but they're the kind of leagues. But if you look at this has a very similar trend to it, where you could have Saudi Arabia becoming the Premier League of that region. So then it will dominate, and you have that crowding out effect then, where those other leagues all become secondary because people in surrounding countries and stuff like that start following those teams in Saudi Arabia. The same way as us over here in Ireland, we follow Liverpool and Man United and Leeds and Chelsea and Arsenal, whatever the teams are. And that's the way it could go, which obviously negates what's going on then in those countries around that area. So it's just a point to be aware of. It's really, really important to think about that as well. So what are the opportunities then for footballers and stuff like that, So obviously you have footballers coming into the region who are coming in on very lucrative contracts, but you'll also have the development of local talent there, local Saudi Arabian players who obviously are going to benefit from this, because naturally, I believe if you have the talent and you play with better players, you'll naturally get better yourself. And through that coaching, and through the investment in grassroots and all that kind of stuff is absolutely huge. So when they're looking at this model, not only are they looking at a model of players coming in, so this is not always going to be a one-way trip. What they're looking at doing as well is they're looking at developing their players on a competitive level, where these teams can potentially go in competing with the best teams in the world or in Europe or whatever it is, which is significant. But also that these players, through TV coverage and broadcasting and all that, kind of somewhat become household names as well. So we'll be referring to players over there that we now know about who are getting coverage that we see, who are playing really, really well, with a sprinkling of this import that comes in and stuff like that. So that's how they're looking at it. But also potential links with Iran and Iraq. And this is where we get into the geography of the region and how the sanctions work with the states and the partnerships and all this kind of stuff. It's quite a spider's web to try and put that all together. And potential talent getting involved as well. How do they bring in potential talent from around those regions? So Iraq and Iran and stuff like that. We know that there's United States sanctions in some of these places. How do they circumvent that, and how does that all work? Sean's in again. A good portion of African players are Muslim and will seamlessly fit into the region. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's from that point of view that I'm coming from. Although that's a very, very good point, Sean. Really, really like that. But it's also whether those leagues get left behind if you like. You know what I mean? So if you think about the lesser leagues in Europe and how they get left behind very, very quickly, um, it's that kind of thing, really. It's not necessarily, your creed, your color, or your religion really is not where this is coming from. It's coming from, how do you dominate in that region? How does the Premier League dominate in Europe? And again, we're talking here, a lot of this is talking about revenue generation and attractiveness and stuff like that. We've seen for years, and we're going to talk about it, the MLS. This is a real threat to the MLS now, because the MLS for years has built a lot of its structures on the back of bringing in stars from European football who are kind of on the tail end of their career. And we seen it only yesterday, the unveiling of Messi at Inter Miami, which was amazing, and also Sergio Busquets. They've gone in there and they've been unveiled in Inter Miami, and of course the net effect that it has on that is absolutely huge. Darren was talking to me a few weeks ago. He was looking up, I think Inter Miami are playing a game in Boston when he's over there, and the tickets prior to Messi signing were like $30 a ticket or something like that, $30-40 a ticket. When Messi signed, those same tickets were $300 and $400 a ticket. That's the effect that these guys have. And imagine that effect that has trickling down into your revenue and your broadcasting and all that kind of stuff. So it's a big issue over there at the moment, so that's it. So there's a lot of lucrative opportunity there, obviously, for players coming in, and also potentially for players exporting out as well. And I think that's what they're really trying to achieve. But also when you look at the kind of, I suppose, in the way of kind of ignoring it as being something that's, over there, if you like. The long-term vision of this is to become the most dominant league. I mean, that's how they see it. And that's going to be really, really difficult because, the Premier League tends to be the dominant league, and it's enshrined in football and the history and the beautiful game and all this kind of thing. And it's very hard to catch up on 100 or 150 years of history and stuff like that in such a short space of time. But again, you can see how it's been affected by the players that are coming in. If you think about what's happened since Ronaldo's gone in there, and especially this summer, and the moves that Chelsea has made with the links through the financing and Clear Lake and all the other players, including players from my own team, Henderson and Fabinho, and what might happen there and all that kind of stuff, you can see how very quickly the fabric and the picture changes really, really quick and really, really rapid. Potentially it could become the most attractive league if you think about it, when you're looking at players and stuff like that. Because if you look at what they're offering, like if you look at the offer to Jordan Henderson, people talking about it being 700 grand a week. How can you compete with that on any level anywhere else in the world at 700 grand a week? So it's absolutely massive. What else is in there? Yeah, that's the one. The long-standing weakness. This is what I'm touching on. This long-standing weakness in the region has been the export of players has been quite minimal. If you think about how many players have come into Europe being successful from the Saudi Arabian region and the country and stuff like that, it's quite minimal. But there's going to be a bigger opportunity now. So we're going to see a bigger influx over the next 5 to 10 years of players coming in. So that's absolutely huge. We're going to see the standards rising. Obviously, of course, the standard of football in the region is going to rise. Facilities are going to be much better, huge investment. Facilities, coaching, sports science, nutrition, better players around you, all that kind of stuff. So that will only lead to a huge boost and a huge development. I don't know how many podcasts I spoke about, investing in your grassroots football and stuff like this. This is just slightly a level above that, but they'll put in the best of everything. We've seen that even in Qatar and the World Cup, and you look at what was put out there and stuff like that. Absolutely massive. And I think given what Saudi Arabia is doing, I think those national leagues, the likes of the Premier League and La Liga, the Bundesliga, the Portuguese league, the Italian league, Spanish, the whole lot, all those leagues, they have to start paying attention to what's happening there at the moment. And because it could have significant knock-on effects in those leagues. I think what those leagues are doing at the moment, I don't think they realise how exposed they are in terms of they hide behind the cloak of UEFA, and the countries hide behind the cloak of FIFA and stuff like that. But that can all be turned on its head really, really quickly. Saudi Arabia beat Argentina in the World Cup. They have talent. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Sean. Great point. That's what we say. Ignore the match at peril. Ignore the match at peril. Um, couldn't really be bothered on the way football is going these days. Too much politics and money. I'd sometimes watch the old classic football matches to take my mind off the bullshit happening. Yeah, that's a lot of people are feeling that way. It just seems to be tarnished, and people are going to be pissed. Yeah, and the thing about it is sometimes this creeps up on you and don't realize it's happening, you know. So if we talk about what's happening at the moment, what's emerging, what's coming out of this, what are we seeing happening with this whole thing that's happening? And as I mentioned, the MLS earlier and stuff like that, they must be sort of very concerned about their situation, albeit Messi went into Miami, and I know there was a deal on the table for Saudi that he turned down, but still, you'll have to be very concerned because a lot of these players seem to be now heading to the region and not necessarily going to the MLS. Like if you look at the likes of, say, Benzema or Kante or players like that, they potentially could have went off to the MLS and what we thought might have happened. But now they're going to these regions, they're being paid truckloads of cash, and it just seems so much more attractive. How are you, Sean? Couldn't Saudi just piss off? I don't think they're going anywhere. So obviously we've seen a massive inflation in the transfer market and player remuneration, which is absolutely massive. Obviously they go hand in hand. But not only are they willing to pay massive transfer fees if that's the need, but also they're willing to absolutely put out massive amounts of money. We've seen the Benzema contract; it's ludicrous. We've seen the one that they offered to Wilfred Zaha. We've seen the Jordan Henderson one. We've seen what Kante and the boys are going for. It's absolutely massive, massive, massive stuff. Joe's in. Joe Duggan, how are you, Joe? Could all this Saudi money accelerate the European Super League? Might be the only way to compete with the wage packets. I don't think the Saudi thing is going to accelerate the European Super League, because I think what's going to evolve, Joe, is it's not going to be a European Super League. I think we're just going to get a Super League, and I think everyone's going to go into that melting pot. And I think that's what their overall goal is. I think that's what they're looking to do. I don't think they're looking to sit out here in the world of exclusion. I think they want to be at the forefront of it. Because we know that the move to the Super League is all about broadcasting rights and money and wealth and all that kind of stuff. And these are the guys who are attached in the center of all this kind of thing. I don't think we're going to get a European Super League, and I think that's part of the reason that it failed, and it's part of the concern that we now have in relation to the clubs that we follow in the region and all that kind of stuff. Danny, I don't like the direction football's going. Super League, too many matches season in Champions League, etc. Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing about the Super League, and I think that's probably the fear for the Super League, is that everything then unravels. Like if you have the Super League and the volume of football, and that's why we spoke about potentially maybe bigger squads going in, and you don't necessarily have an off season, but you just roll through things. But the thing is, what happens to things like the Carabao Cup or the FA Cup, or what even is the net effect of your own local league? You know what I mean? If you're competing in the Super League and it's wide open, and there's relegation, there's qualification, there's ins and outs and stuff like that, what way does that negate the likes of the Premier League or La Liga or the Bundesliga or Italy or whatever it is? You know what I mean? That's the net effect that it has on it. The destruction of financial fair play, of course, has to come into the conversation. I think that's a huge one, especially through multiple club ownership and stuff like that. We've seen the links that have happened. We've seen the Clear Lake situation with Chelsea moving players out to Saudi and stuff like that. What a mammoth task that was to absolutely flush that Chelsea system and then reinvigorate it with new signings, Poch coming in and all that. So we've seen how that can work. But we've also seen a situation where if you're linked with a Saudi club or a Saudi ownership, and let's suppose you own Newcastle, you could very easily turn around and go in and say, right, we want to buy Mbappe. We're going to buy Mbappe and we're going to loan him out to Newcastle. And that's scary. That's really, really scary in terms of, you know what I mean? When you look at all these badges from FIFA and UEFA, and we talk about respect and fair play and, all these things that they wash out there on flags and programs and, at local level and sponsorship and all that kind of stuff, that then goes away. When that kind of situation evolves, that then all goes away. And then we have a bigger dilemma. Sean's in. Uh, I think how successful the Club World Cup in 2025 with 32 teams, and there's some Saudi teams in it, will be the litmus test. Yeah, and I think Qatar was the big one as well, and that was a huge litmus test because I think most people expected that to be a huge wave of negativity, to be an absolute failing, and all that kind of stuff. And it quite, you know, when you think about how we came out of that Qatar World Cup, we came out with a kind of a different view of things and stuff like that. Um, but Daniel, but I will always follow Liverpool no matter what. Absolutely. I mean, that this doesn't change, you know, the flag that you nail to your mast or anything like that. But what it does is it has a huge effect on it and stuff like that. Because if you're operating in a league like the Premier League and you're under the ownership of FSG or the Cronkies or and those investment arms of that aren't intrinsically linked to Saudi investment like what we see in Clear Lake. And if you have a situation where a club in Saudi can just turn around and buy Mbappe and loan him out to Newcastle, or go out and buy whoever it is and loan him out to Man City or PSG or whatever, that ultimately affects your team in that league as well. You know what I mean? So it all has a knock-on effect because it's also closely linked, and that's the one thing when I was doing my homework, as they say, over the weekend about this. The links are crazy in terms of the knock-on effects and what can happen. Crazy, crazy stuff. Um, as we said, the potential hidden birth of the Super League and the expansion of the Champions League to include the Saudi regions and stuff like that, really, really difficult. Hire local talent exports to Europe through investment, coaching, exposure. So that's what we talked about there is, I think they're really looking to develop at a local level in Saudi Arabia and then push those players out, like what happened with the African nations, push their players out into the French leagues, into the Dutch leagues, into the German leagues and whatever else, and develop those players through. And that's what we've seen coming through. And that's why, if you think about it and you look at the rise of the African nations that now sit at the top table of football when discussions are being had and stuff like that, and the AFCON and all that kind of stuff, that's why you see so many African players now coming through that are so good. The Mo Salahs of this world, the Sadio Mane's of this world, just to name a few. I mean, there's hundreds we could name. And that's how, when you think about how it has developed African football and how they've invested in that at a grassroots level and stuff like that, the only thing is they don't carry the wealth to be able to develop it to a level where they would have their own standalone leagues at that level, if you like. But when you see the improvement in the players, and when you see the African teams playing in the World Cups and stuff like that, and all, it's huge and stuff like that. We've seen it in the World Cup just gone, Morocco and stuff like that. Massive, massive, massive stuff. Uh, then they want to use this. Remember, this sports. Sometimes what the net effect of this is, they use the cloak of this to turn your eye away from the stuff that you normally focus on, which is all the bad press stuff, the human rights, the migrant workers, the women's rights, the LGBTQ stuff, and all that kind of stuff. So under the veil of that, they put this curtain out here of this sports, and they're trying to present in a certain way, to gain more Western acceptance. And I think the one thing we'll find coming out of Qatar, whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it, or where you sit or where you don't sit, about all those moral debates and stuff like that, the one thing that came out of it was there definitely was a bigger Western acceptance in terms of how that tournament went and stuff like that, which is undeniable. Um, and then obviously the threats that are in there. We've been talking about the MLS, the threats to those career-ending leagues like the MLS and stuff like that, who are obviously probably very concerned about what's going on. If you look at the players, obviously we said that have gone into the region, some of those players potentially might have went off to the MLS. So then what happens to the MLS? And that's why the significance of Sergio Busquets going in there and also Lionel Messi is absolutely huge. It can't be underestimated. These guys obviously had offers from Saudi Arabia and they turned them down to go to the MLS. So that's absolutely massive, massive, massive stuff. And then the potential growth stalling of established leagues. So what I'm saying is, if they draw in the talent the way they want to draw in the talent, in terms of the growth of the Premier League, the growth of La Liga, the growth of the Bundesliga, could that be stalled somewhat by this move, or is the growth that they have forecasted for the next 10, 15 years, whatever it is, based on the broadcasting contracts and stuff like that. Maybe they don't hit those numbers that they think they're going to hit because now there's a new player in town. And is that new player in town potentially going to turn your eye a little bit more watchable in terms of the talent that they bring in? Let's see what happens. Just a point. So when you talk about, let's finish up and talk about the internal benefits and stuff like that. Evening, cuz, you're looking great. Cheers, Marco. Nice, thanks for having you in. Appreciate that. Let's talk about the internal benefits to Saudi Arabia. I looked at a number of news articles and then looked at a number of write-ups over the weekend, and a lot of these journalists describe Saudi Arabia. This is interesting. Saudi Arabia is Qatar on steroids. Just let that sink in for a minute. Qatar on steroids. Now, we've seen Qatar. We experienced it all through October and November. And Saudi Arabia is described as Qatar on steroids. So just let that sit in. Let that sink in this quote that's come out here. Saudi Arabia sees itself as being at the center of a new world order. You know, when they start mentioning new world orders, that's when people's ears start to prick up and stuff like that. That is a kind of a connecting node in this huge network between Europe, Africa, and Asia. So Saudi Arabia wants to be right in the center of this whole thing of connecting this, you know, this whole sort of, like, you know, when UEFA was being established and all this, they wanted to be the center body to pull all these organizations together and stuff like that. That's how Saudi Arabia is kind of viewing itself. And then they say that the turbocharging of sports stems from fear. And this is an interesting one. This fear comes from always things evolve in countries. And what you're saying here at the moment is there's a kind of if you like, a generational cycle going on there at the moment. Their biggest fear is if they don't provide some of that Western culture, if you like, joy into the country for its youth might rise up. And might rise up against the monarchy that's in place and all that kind of stuff. And that's a big fear for them at the moment. So what they're saying here, could one day the younger people in particular could reject the monarchy, which rules with complete and unchallenged authority. So that's it. They are the rulers there, you know, pumping the oil wealth into social contract that buys social peace and political allegiance. So what they're saying is if they continue to develop these things, not changing their culture somewhat, but providing sort of alternatives that the younger people coming through can feel that they're living life slightly in a different way and slightly similar and stuff like that, keeps the peace. Whereas if they just rule the way they have in the past, that this is the way it is, people are eventually going to rise up and want change. And we've seen that in a number of countries over the years. So it's a big one, you know. The whole sports washing thing, we went on already, this whole cloak of, you know, using this to push out there to create a picture that kind of cloaks this picture over here. True wealth. Sport is a tool. That's what they're saying. Sport is a tool to offset the political distant and upheaval by offering the youth the fashion, music, entertainment, tourism lifestyle that comes with sports. So what we've seen is, you've seen what we've seen in Qatar and how things looked over there and the lifestyle and everyone's dancing around, everyone's enjoying themselves and all that kind of thing. Looked very, very normal life. That may not necessarily be what normal life is there when the cameras of the world are on you, or not on you, let's say. It also comes with health benefits. So what we're talking about here is in terms of if you can get more people playing sports. One of the biggest problems that they have in Saudi Arabia at the moment is they've quite a high sugary and salt diet. So what happens is they have a lot of health issues there. So on top of those issues, if you can get people playing sports, if you can get people living a healthier lifestyle, it has a much better knock-on effect. A lot of those households live a sedentary lifestyle and stuff like that, so they're not out playing sports, lifestyle, sugar and sodium dense diets and all that kind of stuff. Saudi Arabia ranks 17th in the world's most overweight countries, 17th, after the US, Kuwait, and Qatar. You know, massive. So this is what they're talking about here. So they're coming at this from a lot of different angles. Let me see. Marky's in. Best of luck to the women's team on Wednesday morning and to Ringsend's own Abby Larkin. Hopefully she gets on and scores. Yeah, absolutely. Good luck to the women. Good luck to all the women playing in the World Cup. It hasn't started out great for the mark. I don't know if you've seen that game abandoned the other day. It was very, very iffy and stuff like that. But yeah, good luck to all of them. Hope it's a great tournament. Hope they light up, and sure we'll keep an eye on it. Danny's in. Yeah, they are the strongest of the Gulf countries by far. Yeah, absolutely. I read they want to create this league to have less reliance on the petrodollar. Yeah, potentially. I mean, we see the way things are evolving at the moment with electric cars and all this kind of stuff. And I think if anything has come out of the situation with Russia and the Ukraine, it's that like we're all connected. There's a now knock-on effect to everyone. So that's the real issue. The real issue is it's all well and good going, oh, there's a war over here or something going on in the Gulf or the US are getting involved, stuff like that. But the net effect of it, you see it every day in your wallet, you see it every day in your life. You do get affected by it, and we haven't always linked that at times. But that's a great point, Sean. Super point. Hogan Nash Hall, the NWO was coming here in the New World Order. Niall, if Hendo stays, do you think the haters will be on his back? I think they probably will, Redbird, because I think at times there's a lack of intelligence. The guy went out, he was asked by a club would he be interested in leaving. I'm sure conversations were had with Stevie. He agreed his personal terms. I think a conversation was had with Klopp. I think it was very clear he wasn't going to get the game time that he wanted. I think there might have even been a conversation similar to Maguire where there'll be a conversation over the captaincy. And I think the deal will be earned out. I don't see him staying. I think he'll go. I think he's too far down that rabbit hole now to reverse. And I think they'll come to some sort of an agreement. I was reading today, I think they've come to some sort of agreement in terms of Liverpool getting paid a certain amount and he'd have to sacrifice a certain amount. But I think the offer and the deal is too lucrative to turn down. And I think that's what you're going to face. And we're going to face a lot more of that. We're going to see that now every summer and every January window now. This is going to come in massive offers for people to head away to that league. I think it's a great deal. I think it's a great deal for Hendo. I think it's a great deal for the Saudi League. I think it's a great deal for the club and for Stevie. I think it's a super deal for Liverpool. And I think it's a great deal for Jurgen Klopp. And I know a lot of people are up in arms at the moment. They're worried about experience and all this kind of thing. And Fabinho going and it's all that happened all of a sudden and all this kind of thing. Look, it's all good. It's all good. And I think it's a real good situation, I think. Ultimately, Redbird, I think he'll go. I think he has to. I don't think there's much coming back from that. I don't think he should be getting the backlash if it doesn't happen. I think he's looked at the deal. I think Liverpool's looked at the deal. I think the only thing that was missing from this deal is the fact that Saudi Arabia thought we were going to give away our captain and an English international for free, which was a little bit mad. And then they come back to us with cap in hand when we know that they're swimming in dollars. So that was the only thing that scuppered it, kind of. And you can see, even if you've looked at the videos and looked at the pictures, the pre-season stuff and all that stuff and all, you kind of get the feeling, looking at him from a body language point of view, he knows that's not where he should be. So we'll see how that goes. The final point that I wanted to put out here is, part of the drive is the Creighton illusion that when we think of Saudi Arabia, this is what they're trying to think. So now going forward, they're trying to change your mindset. So when you think of Saudi Arabia, they want you to think of Ronaldo. They want you to think of Benzema. They want you to think of Kante. They want you to think of Phil Mickelson. They want you to think of Formula One. They'll want you to think of tennis. They want you to think of all these things. So when you're thinking of Saudi Arabia, you're getting distracted by a lot of that because that's what you associate it with. And you're less distracted by, or less attracted to, the other key issues that remain out there, which is human rights and the LGBTQ and, women's rights and migrant workers and all that kind of stuff. That gets derailed, and then it becomes a location where people might want to go and all that kind of stuff. So not only are they pumping money out to generate it, they're looking at this revenue income that should be coming in and stuff like that as well. So it's a two-way street, really. So that's really what I looked at, folks. And that's really how I broke it down. Have I huge concerns about it? Absolutely. But I've had huge concerns about what football. I've had huge concerns. I'm old enough to remember. I've had huge concerns from even when the Premier League happened. And football has been going down this road for a long, long time now. Obviously, the way things have evolved with the broadcasting and the sponsorship and the image rights and the players' contracts and all these different things have just evolved over time into a crazy kind of level and situation. I would fear a little bit for the way football is going. And I tell you what I fear for. I fear for, my concern is really for that kid on the street kicking a ball against a wall who one day dreams of scoring at the Stratford End or at the Cop or at any of those famous stands. And I think that's where the fear kind of stems from, because it's the losing of the innocence of that situation into this situations. And it's worrying as well, you know what I mean? It's worrying, like, where will football be in 10 years? Where will football be in 20 years? How will we digest it as fans? How will we afford it? If you look at how expensive football has become, pricing people out of being able to go to matches. There's Liverpool fans out there who may never get to see the inside of Anfield. Who knows? There's United fans out there who may never get to see the inside of Old Trafford. And these are the kind of moves that have to be made. And then there's also those moves in terms of those teams that look at that situation and go, right, well, how do we restructure? How do we go into a situation? Like, how do we go up against a Man City? How do we go up against a Newcastle? How do we compete against a PSG? How do we do all these different things? And there's only a certain amount that's available. Like, if you look at a Jurgen Klopp and stuff like that, and you think, right, how is he, or an Eric Ten Hag, and you go, how is he going to compete if the takeover doesn't happen to Qatar? How are we going to find a way to compete with these other clubs that can, sign Mbappe on a whim and, circumvent FFP and all these kind of things? And that's the worrying thing, really, where the competitive nature of football that we love, where two teams go on a pitch and they have an opportunity to compete against each other, is ripped away from that situation. And we're seeing a lot of it already. So that's it, folks. That's my take on Saudi Arabia. Had a quick look at it over the weekend. Read a load of articles on Bloomberg and various reporters and footballers and stuff like that and all. And it's an interesting take on it, because there's so many benefits, there's so many hazards, and we don't really understand where it's trying to take things, and where sports meets politics meets geography and all these other things. And obviously, when there's this kind of wealth involved, questions have to be asked. Until next time, folks, pleasure doing the show as always. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification, and of course, drop a like on the video. As I said, we will be back tomorrow with a couple of shows. Dark Side of the Ring review, the adorable Adrian Adonis, and I'm going to be on Doug's podcast, the Dugout Football Show. Check that out. We're going to be previewing Liverpool's pre-season game on Wednesday. It's going to be an interesting preview, to be honest, as well. I don't know if you've looked at that German team. I think they're in Division 2 or Division 3 in Germany, but we'll do what we can, and we'll have a good natter about what's going on in the transfer window and stuff like that as well. So always check out all the channels, folks. Pleasures for you guys all in the chat. Thank you very much for joining us. Ted with the last comment. Got in late, but have to say we sadly let football go this way, where it was all about the money and not about the game. Absolutely. Great point, Ted. Next time, folks. Absolute pleasure. Cheers, Ian. Great show.